Okay, hello everyone. So this lecture, we will continue our introduction of malware, including virus, worms, Trojan horse, and some other new terms in the context of malware. Before we start, I would like to recap what we have learned about virus. As you see, I made some handwritten notes on computer virus, try to capture the important points about computer virus. And so first of all, computer virus is not a standalone program. It needs to attach to another program, which is so-called host program or host software. And it has a feature that it will try to replicate itself by adding itself to other programs which haven't been infected yet. So it has this process called the self-replication process. And then basically it's a copy of itself. In the early days, it's exactly the same copy of the original virus, but as it involves some new variants of the original virus was developed. Here, it's not necessarily exactly the same as the original one. In computer virus, considering its components and its lifetime phases, like we have these three essential components of most computer viruses. The first is the infection part. The second is the trigger or logic bomb part. And the third one is the payload part. And these three parts corresponding to the four different phases of a virus. So the first phase is dominant phase. The virus is idle and wait for some conditions in the trigger part. And when it is triggered, when some conditions in the trigger is satisfied, then it starts to propagate and start to run the payload. I try to hide my. So basically, you can connect these parts with these phases. And for this logic bomb, if it is satisfied, then it enters into triggering phase. If the condition is not satisfied, basically the virus will be in the idle phase. As there are many viruses, I would say millions of viruses out in the network. So researchers try to classify computer virus in different ways. So there are two types of general classifications. The first one is based on the touched program and file that a virus is intended for. I get a question from asking, why is it important for the virus to spread to different hosts? Isn't it enough to infect one host and then execute the payload? This is a rather general answer to this question. For different computer viruses have different purposes. It's really based on what kind of purposes of the virus offer. I get a question from Christian said, can you even call it a virus if it does not spread? a virus, we call it a virus. This name you can see it's borrowed from the real world, from the biological world. So to capture essential features of some malwares, and if it has this functionality of a self-replicate, then it's like kind of satisfy this feature. If a malware which does not have self-replication function, then we cannot call it a virus. So it's like a basic feature of computer virus. So we continue our recap of the virus. And based on the touched files or programs a virus is intended for, because most of the virus were written like specific to some program, and it only activate, and it can be only running like within some type of programs. So then it has this, the first class is a boot sector infector. What is the purpose of a virus? I got this question. To cause some problem or annoyance to a computer system. I would say that's a general purpose of virus. Again, it depends on the intention of the virus writer. Some of them, they want to show off, to show their technical competence among their colleagues. Some of them want to attract media attention, and some of them want to make money out of for some destruction. There are various ways. This question is pretty much like what's the purpose of a program? And the only difference is for most of the virus, it has malicious purpose, destructive functions, other than normal computer programs, which tries to provide some services to the users. That's and my personal distinction between computer virus and normal computer program. In general, a virus can do almost all the things that a program is allowed to do. Okay, and then we mentioned this macro virus, which is attached to, or scripting virus, which is attached to some documents instead of programs. And there are other type of virus called multi-party. So it can attach to different like programs, some booting files, and documents, maybe even like some MP3 or MP4 files or pictures. So this is the general classification based on the targets of a virus. Another classification is based on the concealment strategy of virus. For most of the virus, if it is detected by the user, by the antivirus software, then it will be normally deleted, removed in quite short time. So most of the virus developers are well aware of it. They try to hide their malicious code in different ways. And we mentioned encryption, or the part of the virus contains the random generated encryption key, and use some like some ciphers, not necessarily a very strong cipher, to encrypt itself before it replicates, before it attaches to another program. So this the second type is stealth. it's a general term that tries to hide itself in different ways. And we also mentioned the polymorphic virus and the metamorphic virus. So these are the ways that the computer virus try to hide itself from being detected. And we also introduced a bit about the computer worms that in Wednesday lecture. Computer worm has quite a lot of features in common as computer virus. So here I also like draw some, take some notes and try to gather all its essential features. So here, as you see, different from computer virus, computer worms try to attach to innocent PC and server and other computer systems. So itself, it's a standalone program. And it can self-duplicate itself and try to infect other computers in this way. So it also has this self-replication process. And regarding its components and the phases, it's basically the same as a computer virus, because it has these 3 components and also these phases. And because it's a bit different of computer virus, it's a standalone. Okay, I get this question from Christian, not from George. What does propagation means? Propagation, it means a spread. How a computer worm spread from one computer to other computers. And in the beginning, computer virus mostly try to infect other clean program in a same system, because that's in early days, 1980s, and before the invention of internet. So most of the computers are not connected. But after the invention of internet and also its popularity, more and more and more computer systems are connected within a local network or within the internet. So it's a rather natural for for the worm writers and developers to think of how can they spread their malicious worm in a more efficient way, right? There are several ways for computer worm to propagate, to spread in a network. So here I also take notes of from the textbook. A common way is to send computer worm in the email as an email attachment, or send the worm in some instant message application. And this is the typical way of most computer worms in the beginning. And in last lecture, we mentioned the infamous the Melissa. So it's hidden in the Word document, and when it is activated, then it sends itself to the first 50 email addresses in the victim's address book. So you already learned some computer and science basic things, and you know this exponential complexity and exponential growth. So you can imagine, okay, 50, that's really a lot. If you do some very basic rough estimation, for nowadays we have around 6 billion devices connected to the internet. 6 billion. And if you consider of this number, like if we consider 1 billion like as a 1 gigabyte, that's 2 to the power 30. So 6 billion is no more than 2 to the power 32. And if you divide by 32 by like 4, then we have 2 to the power 4 to the power 8. So I try to increase the base like 16 to the power 8. So it basically means if the worm is sent out on the base of 16, it's about 8 rounds of all this, or like 8 iterations. Then all the devices connected to the internet could be infected. So you can imagine how fast the worm can be infected, can be spreading in the internet. And the next one is file sharing services. This is also in the early days, they have different file sharing protocols. One widely used is FTP protocol, file transfer protocol. And also some of the network, because at that time, computers are connected to the network, it's quite often that some computer wants to log into other computers to do some work. So in this process, most of the servers, they provide this remote login process functionality, remote file access, and sometimes remote execution functionality at the server side. And if the server is not properly configured and there's some vulnerability detected by an attacker, then they might write a worm, this malicious code, try to access to the server and then upload itself to the server, or maybe run some things that could be given the execution functionality, then the worm can be run on the server. These are the propagation methods of computer worms. Of course, it's not complete list. So there could be some other measures. And nowadays, like what about try to distribute the computer worms in social media? Just write an appealing name for the worm, then post it in the social media. It could attract some unsuspecting users to download it and run it. So last time we have stopped at the examples of worms, and personally I like to show you some specific examples, but we don't have enough time, so I will just lead you through some of these examples, and then for the others, I will prefer you to explore some of these worms by yourself to see what are the damages these worms has caused to the internet. So the first one is this Happy 1999. That's what we have already showed. So it opens up a window and set the firewalls for the victim user. And the other one, the second one, this I love you. So, I have some resources about this file, and I also print something about the introduction of I love you. This one, first, its a target is a Windows system. And it was reported that over 10 million Windows personal computers were infected by this computer worm, I love you. And after May 5th of 2000. And what it looks like, it's here. And you cannot see clearly. I will switch to. It's like this. So it's the subject of the mail. So it's an email worm. And the subject is, I love you. And the body of this mail is, kindly check the attached love letter coming from me. And then they have this worm. It's a Visual Basic script. But in Windows, by default, especially in Windows XP and in like there's a 2000, that's also Windows 2000. This Windows operating system, by default, they hide the format of some file. So what is displayed to the user is love letter for you.txt. And this VBS, the real suffix, was hidden. And it caused many users to click this love letter out of curiosity and to see what are the texts. And unfortunately, it basically wrong this Visual Basic, this service, this Visual Basic script, and this file. And this file will automatically search for the address book and send itself to all the emails in the address book. Since this the sender of this email is basically an acquaintance or a colleague or maybe a friend to the recipient. And especially if it's among young people, then this romance relation or some unclear romance relation, okay, it's really attractive to young people. And as a result, it caused, it's estimated that it leads to a multi-billion-dollar damage, the cost of this virus, because it was spread very quickly. Let's take a very quick look at some introduction of this I love you letter. So it was created by two computer developers in Philippines. And that one is an undergraduate student. And after it was, it caused a very serious problem. And they were sent to the police and sent to the court. And they have their kind of the argument that, okay, they may release this malware by accident. And let's see, let's try to get something interesting. So here is about the process. So I'll just read for you. So the developers of the worm become targets of a criminal investigation by an agent in Philippine National Bureau of Investigation. And they were, of course, they were questioned. And but at that time, because it's a 2000, right? The agency is not quite sure what kind of crime could apply to their case. And it was suggested that they could be charged with violating Republic Act and some other this credit card fraud, because they tried to use credit card and to use internet services to distribute their worm. And in the end, if I remember correctly, there's no very clear sentence to these developers because of the lack of specific law regulations, and they were in a prison. Maybe not really in the prison. They were released quite short after they were arrested by the police. Here, during this investigation, it's interesting that the second author of this virus, during his undergraduate thesis, this undergraduate student has proposed the implementation of a Trojan to steal internet login password. And in this way, he thinks the user would finally be able to avoid an internet connection. And that's his intention. And that's his proposals in his undergraduate project. Now, not surprisingly, this project was rejected. And then he might find some other collaboration with some young people who already graduated. They wrote this, I love you, this one. And here you see it's reported cost is around 50 million US dollars. And it cost 500,000 computers got infected at that time. It's quite serious. This is the I love you one. The second one is here. All I list here is very dangerous and serious computer worms. The second one is the code red. It's a very short piece of worm. It only has around less than 4,000 bytes in its code. And itself tried to hack the buffer overflow vulnerability in Microsoft Internet Information Server. And let's see here. Look at its behavior. So in general, the behavior is okay. This worm arrives at a server, and it has this get this code inside. That's quite normal for HTTP request. And at that time, most of the server still use the normal HTTP with TCP port number 80. So we will learn this like around 2 weeks later. Then you will get more idea about it. And this request contains a code that exploits a lone buffer overflow vulnerability in the software in Microsoft Internet Information Server. That's the server for Microsoft and for this IE for many Windows systems. And due to this buffer overflow vulnerability, the worm can be run and from within this RIS server, and shortly after, and also this worm runs entirely in memory, and then it's quite difficult to find it because after it's only available when it's run, and then it's hidden, and most of the antivirus software will only scan the hard disk the hard drive of the server of the computer, and also it's quite short. Interesting here, let's look at some piece of information for code red. And using this API, this create thread API in its code, the code red will try to create 100 threads or copies of itself. Interesting here, but due to a bug in its code, it may actually create many more threads. That's also a reason that code red has caused really serious problem. And if you look at this infection size here, it's like double of the previous the worm, the larvae worm, and also this reported causes. It's not as much as that one because mostly it affected the servers, not the personal computers. But because of this bug here, so the infected computers are likely to have very high CPU loads because of this. And very interesting, each of these threads check for the file, this file, not worm. And if this file exists, the worm does not run, and the thread goes into an infinite sleep state. So it's uncertain what the exact significance or intention of this not worm file, but there's some suspicion that this file may have only existed on one or a few creators' computers in order to prevent itself being infected. And regarding the triggering phase, so the trigger condition is if the date is between 20th and 28th of each month, then the worm will send jump data to this port 80, on this IP address. Although you haven't done IP address, I think you heard of it before. So basically, it's the ID of a computer in the network. So then the IP address of this IP address, in fact, is the US government server. It's whitehouse.gov.government. That's a server. And after this 28th, after this, between the 28th of this month till 19th of next month, then this worm, it goes into a sleep mode, and it cannot be awakened unless like the user accidentally run it. And for this thread, the 100th thread of the worm will check the language of the local page of the server. And if the language is US English, then it will change the page to look like it is hacked by Chinese. It's not here. Then we can only see here, like this. Code red HTML. So it changed the web page and display. Okay, welcome to HTTP and www.worm.com, hacked by Chinese. That's kind of part of its payload. And there's some other information about it. I went, excuse me. I close it. Okay, thanks. So here, if I, yes. And it was about 2001. And the origin, it is reported from China. This is a city of China. But I personally thought it's not because I'm Chinese, it's because I remember around 2000, the technology of the computer and also the internet in China was quite, it's basically under development. It's at its early stage of the whole internet. And I remember at that time, not many universities have computer science as a major in many universities. So, and also this is a Foshan. This is a city in Guangdong, and I think there's no university in this city. And of course, it has very weak connection, like whether this city or why it is from this city. Okay, let's move on to next. Okay, this Blaster and Sasser. Again, it's a vulnerability in the Windows operating system. Let me. I mentioned if you attend or watch the videos on Wednesday lecture, then you might already know this guy. He's a Finnish security expert or computer virus expert, and he gave a talk on evolution of computer virus back to 2011. And here I choose his introduction. He's an excellent speaker. So I will play it. And also during this time, if you want to have a break, then feel free to have a break, take some coffee, stretch your legs. So let's start.
4.5 TCP, openly, anybody can connect to it from anywhere in the world. And in our ranges, great kinds, including Slapper and Slammer and Blaster and Sasser. Most of these targeting Windows workstations using remote exploits in LSASS or in RPC or some other.
By the way, can you hear it properly? Or can you watch it properly? Okay.
A network visible resources of Windows. And we have to remember 2004, most Windows users were not running a firewall. I mean, if they were online, even if they were inside a company, most likely they had open ports all the way to the internet, which now feels pretty weird. That's the situation at the time. So you had port 139 or port 445 TCP openly. Anybody could connect to it from anywhere in the world. And if there were remote exploits, they could exploit them. And they did. And that's how, for example, Sasser spread. So if you think about that, you have one infected PC, and it just starts scanning either random IP addresses or just one by one. Like try to go through all IP4 addresses. And the IP4 addresses we don't have. I mean, we have 4.3 billion IP addresses, which is perfectly scannable. You can scan them all. Many of these, I mean, most of these weren't scanned, every single IP address in the world. And of course, they'll find empty addresses, like addresses which route nowhere. So there's nothing to infect. Or they'll find an address which has a computer, but it's a wrong kind of a computer, like it's a Mac. A Windows won't be able to infect it. Or it finds a right kind of a computer, like a Windows computer, but it's blocked. It's, I mean, behind a firewall or some sort of routing protection, so you can't connect. Or it's already patched, so the vulnerability has already been closed by the user. But as you can guess, if it just keeps on scanning and keeps on scanning, eventually it will find a computer which is the right kind of a computer, which is not behind a firewall, which has not yet been patched. And in that case, of course, it will infect that computer. And it will immediately start replicating further from that computer. In fact, they are now both scanning the whole public IP ranges, and it gets faster and faster. And this explains why we got these massive spreading speeds, including Slammer. It was later proven that it scanned the whole IP4 address range in less than 20 minutes from the moment when it was started. And that's pretty remarkable. In 20 minutes, all of us who were online in 2003, it scanned our computers, it scanned our mobile phones, if we had mobile phones with internet connectivity at the time. And to the end user, you would typically know that something like this was happening because you get some sort of a crash on your system. Slammer, Blaster, and Sasser, for example, would cause a system shutdown because they would remotely crash RPC or LSASS in Windows at the time. So the end user would see that there's a problem. His PC would shut down. He would have 60 seconds of time to save his data, and then it would shut down. He would reboot, and he would most likely see it again in a minute or two, or maybe in 10 minutes, maybe in half an hour. Depends on when the next time someone else is scanning his IP address. So let's think about this. You are an end user. You start seeing this regularly on your PC. You can't work because your PC keeps rebooting. What are you going to do? Well, you ask around. What should I do? My PC reboots. Somebody will know that, yeah, it's a virus. All right. What should I do? Well, you should patch the hole, patch the RPC vulnerability or the LSASS vulnerability. All right. How do I patch it? Well, you go to Microsoft.com and you find the patch, you download it, you run it. Okay. Let's do that. We have here Microsoft download pages from 2003. That's the actual patch for the RPC vulnerability NS03039. Click download. Excellent. We get an executable file. Let's download it on our desktop. Here we go. And now we're downloading it. Excellent. And of course, this takes a while, which means it's more than likely that you'll actually get, while you're downloading it, you get the same error message. And now you have two counters on your screen at the same time. You have the countdown from 60 seconds to 0 of reboot, and you have the download counter, like how many percentages of the actual patch you've downloaded. So you're basically running a game or a race, like who's going to be first. And this game was being run on thousands and thousands of computers around the world. And of course, most of the users lost again. They didn't get the patch before it rebooted again. Very, very frustrating. And these are the kinds of problems that led Microsoft to change their the way they look into security. 2003, they did the big overhaul, code review of Windows base code, and started taking security seriously. This resulted first in Service Pack 2 for Windows XP, later into what we have today, for example, in 64 with Windows 7, which actually has a decent security model. So this was the basic reason why security in Windows world regarding problems like these were finally taken seriously. And the problems we saw at the time were serious. Here's the packet loss chart of the whole internet during the hours when the slammer worm started spreading. Typical packet loss globally, 1 to 2%, then suddenly jumps to 20, 30%. Massive problems. So we started getting denial of service problems on systems which weren't infected themselves, but they were in the same networks with infected systems, and the packet generation that they saw was so massive that we started seeing problems with critical infrastructure. So in 2003, I wrote down
So you can see this video, I already shared the link. So you can see some of it that I haven't played for you. And I think we can have 10 minutes later, a 10 minutes break, and then we can start our lecture. Recording. So welcome back, everyone. Now let's move on to the next part of malware, about the propagation methods. It's propagated by social engineering. And before the lecture, we already mentioned some of these ways. Here is a screenshot of a malware, or this social engineering propagation. If you are a Windows user and you receive this in your Outlook, and with this, the subject is not clear yet, but here with the body, okay. Microsoft client, this is the latest version of security update, September 2003, cumulative patch, and then blah, blah, and all these things. And also, this Trojan was sent around this time. It's when this patch was released by Windows. It's rather misleading, and for most users, they will feel like, okay, it's not. It looks like it's really convenient for me. It's a good service. Then click the link, and maybe lead to some web page that tries to gather some information of the user. So this is the idea of this social engineering for propagation. In general, this propagation by social engineering is try to trick users to assist in the compromise of its own system. There are two general ways. One is a spam email. These spam emails, the attacker mostly they send out the unsolicited bulk emails to many email addresses with this probability that some user could click some link or could download some attachment. If suppose the probability is okay, 0.1% of user who receive this email will click on the attachment. Then if the attacker send like 100,000 or 1 million such emails, then the number of victims still is quite big. And another way is a common carrier of malware as attachment for wire links. That's what I described. And it's a kind of part of the phishing attacks. Like the previous one is also quite similar. So sometimes it's these links, sometimes it's attachment. If it's a link, the link itself appear to be legitimate and normal links. But if you click on it, it may lead you to some phishing web page. In fact, I got this email, I think last week. Let me show you. Okay, this is the email. And I think recently you may have heard like last week, and all the bus drivers strikes, and there are some other. I also read the news that there are other workers they want to go on strike, and so it's about how to arguing and to increase the salaries, and it's normal. And it could be, I remember maybe 2 years ago, also some university professors tried to go on strike because they are not satisfied with the salary. And I received this last week. It's about, okay, this salary 2020. And it just, okay, this UIB logo and this my email address and this link. And with this learn, and so it's rather attractive. When I received it, I thought it was a real salary. This from the salary office, because we haven't received some notification about the salary adjustment this year. And I'm still a bit hesitant to directly click on it. So what I did, I copied this link to the address bar of the Chrome. I want to see its real content instead of direct clicking. Then I got this. Okay. And what happened? Then it made me rather suspicious about this link. So then I put my mouse on it. Now you see the real URL of this link. This is commontrody.com.pig.ueb.ueb.htm. It's a totally different URL from the link here. And in this process, you see if I received some emails which are more attractive to me, maybe okay, write an email like in kind of in the words from the director or from the salary office, and also mentioned, okay, this is our final decision about your salary this year, and we decided to increase your salary by a certain percent. If you want to know more details, then okay, here's the attachment, something like this. Then it could lead me to create an account on this link. And this is a typical way of social engineering, and send some email to other users, and then including some malicious links. Has any of you received a similar email instead of this adware? That's too much. Like if you register at some websites, then suddenly you received many spam emails about advertisements. That's adware. No, I didn't click the link. I was suspicious about it because I didn't ask for it. That's a major reason. I mean, if I previously asked for and applied for increase my salary, then the story could be different. And also, when I received some emails that appeared to be suspicious, and you see I have, and some of you use macOS email client. Google made a phishing quiz on this. Yeah, good. I see you are on discussion, and I want to show you this to try to exclude some of the spam email or phishing email from your side. And if you use a macOS mail client and you click here, you have this customized toolbar, then you can drag this the show the header information like this one. Then here, then you will see more traffic from the sender to you, and you can investigate this. I mean, if for here you see this email address is from uib.no, but this could be not the real sender. Then from here, mostly you can get some information, and sometimes you can figure out the sender is not a real sender, it's just a spam email. Now I come back to your question. For some of the emails, that's true. That's another way. If you want to reduce this risk at best from your side, then you can, since you already install Kali Linux in VirtualBox, and if you haven't run a lot of things, save a lot of things in Kali Linux, then you can use Kali Linux to open the email. And even if you are really kind of motivated to click on the attachments, then you can open it in virtual machine. Then in this case, the worst situation for you is, okay, the Kali Linux is infected. Then you can just delete this. Then you reinstall Kali Linux. There are some measures like try to install some light operating system within VirtualBox, then to do some this suspicious behaviors on like when you try to click on some link or try to open some files. And even for, I have to tell you, even for our TA, Alessandro, when he graded the exercise and the assignments last semester, also when he was a TA for my computer network course, and I had the assignments with some Python implementation. So what he is quite a conservative. So he said he run all these implementation, the submissions from students in VirtualBox instead of in his own host operating system. So I consider it's a rather good practice. It's not necessarily to avoid some malware. It's about how you control some of the softwares that you are not quite familiar with. It's a good practice to run it in an isolated environment instead of directly in your host operating system. Yeah, I already explained this. On the mention, I got email flagged as a spam that was quite obvious attempt at blackmail using Bitcoin as payment. Yeah, checking the payment address provided with I'm not only one receiving. Yeah, in most of cases, if you receive some email which is rather suspicious, I would say you are definitely not alone. You might be one of the million recipients, one of the maybe 10 million recipients. That's quite normal. And they just gather some information, some user accounts from different resources. I got Joachim mentioned something to note. It also has in the URL. You mean in this? Yes, that's a good point. I'm not sure whether Lord is in URL. You can have a special symbol, but it would be acceptable in future. Joachim, that's why this URL cannot accept other symbols, only English and digits, right? Amir asked, isn't it possible for a malware to escape the virtual machine and infect a host PC? I cannot say it's 100% not possible, but the likelihood is very, very low. It's very low. Only if the like you have a share folder between the host and the guest system, then some of these programs is dragged into the shared folder, which the host system can directly run it and operate on it. And for the memory, because when you shut down the virtual machine, then all the memory of the virtual machine will be released. So it won't last long because it's a virtual memory. It's not the real memory. So the likelihood is very low. Okay, let's continue our lecture. Do you have more questions? I feel like if I open some like a personalized information, like some personalized experience, then you are more interested. And yeah, I'll try to think of some more personal experience and share this with you, and we can have some discussion on it. That's better. And for some of these lectures, I don't want to repeat all of them because you can also read it. But in general, I will cover most important points in lectures. So then we can move on to the Trojan horses. I think most of you heard of Trojan horses. Am I right? Indeed, yes, yes. Okay. So then I will just read it out, and then we move on to the next slide. So a Trojan horse is a useful or semi-useful program that contains hidden code of a malicious nature that executes when the program is invoked. In general, it's just okay. Some appear to be useful program which hide the malicious intention inside. And I guess most of you have watched this Troy, this movie, and that's where this Trojan horse was originated. And the nature of a Trojan horse is first, it's different from computer virus and computer worms that it does not propagate itself. And because of this, it can be easily eliminated if the user detects it, or if an anti-malware software detects it. So in general, it's easy to deal with Trojan horse than computer virus and worms, because it's just a one piece of code and it does not replicate. But the problem is for developers of Trojan horses, I mean, in the early days, of course, they are quite smart, they are clever. They wouldn't restrict themselves to just have this nature. Okay. Why would they like to do this? I got similar questions from some students during lecture. And why do they have this triggering function, whether it's possible to not have the triggering function in a virus? And why do they wait for this special time period? Why don't it directly run in the victim system? It depends on the real purpose and intention of the virus. And if they can easily enlarge the damage, the scale of the damage in the network, and if they can get more incentives because of this, then why they don't do this? It's just maybe less than 10 lines of code, then the functionality is achieved, right? Here you have, I have some of these examples which appear to be useful. And here is this cron.exe with some extra suffix. This is a typical example of a Trojan horse. And also some of these web pages, they are phishing web pages. Like in the video before, you see this google.com. This google.com, and also this Yahoo. And later on, like around 2005, 2006, they have quite nasty malware come into play. That's the ransomware. And the CryptLocker is one of the earliest known ransomwares. And this is quite nasty, in fact, and it's still I think it's all around the internet nowadays. And the developers gradually realized they can make money out of this malware individually. And what they do is they encrypt the victim's machine's file, like some pictures, some documents, especially some documents and PDF files, because in some cases it's more important than personal pictures to many workers. They need to open their report, they need to edit their report and send to their boss. For students, you need to prepare the report and to finish some courses. And it's, I wouldn't say it's more important, but you may care this much more than some of the pictures that is stored in your computer. And this CryptLocker, this Trojan horse, it encrypts some of these files and asks the user to pay the ransom before they can get the decryption key. So this is the screenshot of the CryptLocker. I think I have a larger one. This is WannaCry, and this is WannaCry. So let's take a closer look at this capture figure. Your personal files are encrypted. As mentioned, your important file encryption proceeds on this computer. Photos, videos, documents. And here is a complete list of the encrypted files. And you click the link and you did see all the files that are the files in your computer system. And it mentioned encryption was produced during a unique public key RSA 2048. Now you have your real understanding about the security of RSA 2048. So far, I would say there's no way to practically decrypt RSA 2048 without the private key. There's no way. In the beginning, some of these ransomware, they choose some weak and fast cipher to encrypt the file. But later, they directly switch to very strong cipher to encrypt the file. Mostly they are public key ciphers, because then they can send the private key to the victim after they paid the ransom. And so it mentioned to decrypt a file, you need to obtain the private key. And some of these ransomware, they are rather considerable, and they provide very detailed instructions to the victim to how to pay and how to decrypt the files. And here you say the single copy of the private key, which will allow you to decrypt the files located at a secret server on the internet. And the server will destroy the key after a time specified in this window. And like here, and they get this countdown timer and to increase the stress of the victims psychologically. And when you see it, okay, it's only have 54 hours, and then you, the victim then was hesitant and tried to try other ways to avoid paying the ransom. But this countdown timer, it's like a sword hung on the head of the victim. It's rather nasty. And then after that, nobody will never be able to restore the file, because these private keys are deleted. And some of this ransomware, they even give you like a hint and some of this private key to convince the user, the victim, that they do have all the private keys. So they may list, okay, here's the private key for your first file, and all the other private keys are stored in somewhere, and then you need to pay for this private key. Here, any attempt to remove or damage this software will need to immediate destruction of the private key used by the stored by the server. On that, you mentioned that you previously get this ransomware. I hope you haven't got this type of ransomware. It's rather nasty, and it causes a lot of stress to the victims. These are some of the examples of this malware, and I have been focusing on the computer virus and computer worms, and also Trojan horse. I give more time on them because they are the early examples of malware, and they have more recognizable features. Right? The first, they have several features hidden inside another program. A second feature, an independent program. Third one, it's like self-replication, propagate itself into other programs and other systems. The fourth one potentially cause destructions against the assets in information systems. These assets including files, softwares, operating systems, sometimes even hardware's infrastructures. And here, you from our introduction of this malware, then for virus, it has features 1, 3, 4. For worms, they have features 2, 3, 4. And for Trojan horse, they have features 1 and 4. Now let's look at the second part of malware. I mentioned the malware can be classified based on how they propagate, and also based on how what's the content of the payload, what kind of damage they can cause to the victim system. In general, this system corruption, it can do all the things that a program is allowed to do, or the program has privileged rights in the operating system to do. So it could cause data destruction. This destruction could like delete some files or overwrite the content of some file, encrypt the data, that's the ransomware. And for the hardwares, it can cause the BIOS, like they corrupt the BIOS code in the booting process. And it can control some industry systems to operate and to increase the failure rate of some systems. And a good example is this Stuxnet worm. And in fact, here in this video, in the video by Mikko, in the last,
I wrote down some of the things which explains that, you know, all your files have now been encrypted stuff for a number, many used in Windows 7. And it was...
Okay, we can take a quick look at this one, and then we skim through the other malware. This Stuxnet, it's quite the untypical computer worm, which dedicated to control some specific industry system instead of like very general computer systems.
A successful operation wanted to disrupt the Natan's nuclear enrichment plant in Iran, and it did. In fact, we believe it already did what it wanted to do in 2009. So by the time it found it in 2010, it didn't actually matter anymore. It had already done what it did. So let's look at that a little bit closer. We have obviously computers everywhere in factories, in plants. You go to any chemical plant, any power plant, any food processing plant, you look around, it's all being run by these. That's a Siemens S7400, a typical PLC programmable logic controller. But for example, the elevators in this building most likely run PLCs or maybe STUs, something along these lines. Automation, which isn't running Windows, isn't running, it's actually running, Siemens gear is running 32-bit Linux inside. Very fault tolerant systems. And the way they are being programmed is typically from Windows workstations. And that's the route in. Stuxnet will infect pretty much any Windows computer in the world, but it won't do anything except replicate unless the computer has the Siemens Step 7 programming environment installed. And that's the environment you use to program these. And even if it finds Step 7 running on the computer, it won't do anything unless it's connected to the right kind of a PLC. It has to be Siemens S7417 or another model. If it finds the right PLC, then it will reprogram the PLC. And now it waits for somebody to disconnect the PLC from the computer and take it to a factory floor. And it still won't do anything unless it's connected exactly the right kind of gear. And it's looking specifically these. These are high-frequency power converters manufactured by a company called Vacon. It's looking for a specific number of the right kind of high-frequency power converters. And of course, these, we believe, were the converters that were used to spin the centrifuges in the Natan's nuclear enrichment plant. So the real target becomes not just the high-frequency power converters, but the whole nuclear program, or the nuclear enrichment program. So it has been a pretty wild ride. If we look at the last 25 years, from brain spreading on 5 1/4-inch floppy.
Yeah, you see this Stuxnet worm, and you can search for it if you are interested. And the other one is logical bomb. So it activates when certain conditions are met. And so it's a kind of inside the virus or computer worms. And there are some other malware. The first category is this zombie and bots. So basically, this the attacker take over another internet-attached computer. Sometimes it's not really personal computer. It could be some device. Nowadays, we have so there's a new term, what is called Internet of Things, and these are very cheap devices and which are not very advanced. Meanwhile, they are not very well protected. And then use this attack tries to infect these devices and computers, try to infect it, and then to send logic to these victim computers with the purpose to control it in some times. And as this infection spreads in the internet, then it leads to a connection of bots, which is capable of acting in a coordinated manner, what is called a botnet. And nowadays, this botnet is not developed or created by a single individual or person. In fact, they are also, there could be some organizations or group of hackers. They collaborate on building up these botnets, and then some of them then sell these botnets in the dark market, in the internet. And for the user or the peer, they just need to buy these botnets and then run some command. Then they can attack some of their enemies and organizations that they are targeting. So because of this, the botnet is distributed, so it can cause more serious problems than a single computer. which is infected. And first one of the typical use of botnets is so-called distributed denial services attacks, and we will introduce this later on. And the other one, spamming emails. Some of you already mentioned, you have received the email and you can see clearly you are not the only person who received email. That's quite normal. And by using botnet, it's difficult to locate, to identify the sender of this spamming email. Because as you see, what I have demonstrated, show with this Microsoft, with this macOS mail client, I can only see the sender, but this sender is not necessarily the real sender of the email. That's a problem. And for sleeping traffic, that's a quite typical use, because these botnets, these bots, computers are distributed and they locate in different networks. And if the attacker wants to capture some traffic that he or she is interested in, then it's really good. It's really handy to use these botnets. And key logging, and then spreading new malware because the number of these botnets, so it caused the spreading speed much faster. And installing advertisements, that's adware, and manipulating online polls and games. That's also an interesting attack by botnets. So for some of the games, if the attacker can control enough amount of the computers which are involved in the game, then the attacker increase its winning rate of the game. So it's like the US election for Donald Trump, right? That they have this news about the election process controlled by some hackers. And there are some other types of malware. Basically, it's for the newer malware. The term of them is kind of self-explaining. You can get the payload, the intention of the payload from its term, like these keyloggers. And last semester, I used Windows 7 to demonstrate how this keylogger can be used to capture the user's keystroke. But I don't have enough space in my Mac that I deleted the Windows 7. But for you, in fact, you can find this demo at YouTube. Is this youtube.com? There's a software, this is a hacking tool called HackKey. Not this one, keylogger. This one, this keylogger, HackKey. And you can, I suggest you to watch this video because it's quite surprising to me. Previously, I heard of this keylogger, but I haven't seen it. And then after I see it and after I managed to do it myself, then I feel like, okay, it is quite dangerous for this keylogger. It can capture most of the keystroke by the user. You can easily lose sensitive information and the password for your account. I see we are already at the end of the time, so I will leave you to go through the other malware. As I mentioned, most of the malware you can get its intention, its payload quite easily from its name. And also for the more detailed and more introduction of them, then you can refer to the textbook. So next week, we will focus on the countermeasures of all this malware. That's all. Thanks. That's today's lecture.